Don't open it. The voice cut through the crystal-lit ballroom like a sudden alarm, stopping every movement in the room as all eyes turned toward a small figure standing near the center of the grand Harrington gala. 8-year-old Aaliyah Johnson stood frozen in front of a long black velvet table where a carefully wrapped gift box rested under soft golden lights, her chest rising quickly as if she had just outrun something no one else could see. For a split second, the entire room seemed to lose its rhythm. Waiters paused mid-step, glasses hovered inches from lips, and billionaire William Harrington slowly lowered his hand from the ribbon he was about to untie. "Excuse me," he asked, his voice calm but edged with confusion, turning toward the child as if trying to understand whether this was a misunderstanding or an interruption. Around him, guests exchanged polite smiles, assuming it was a child's imagination, a moment of nerves in an unfamiliar place. But Aaliyah didn't move, her dark eyes locked on the gift as if it carried weight far beyond its elegant wrapping. Victoria Lane, William's assistant, quickly stepped forward with a nervous smile, gently placing a hand near the girl's shoulder without touching her. "Sweetheart, it's just a gift," she said softly, glancing at the crowd as if to reassure them this was nothing more than an innocent disruption. But Aaliyah shook her head once, firmly, her braids shifting slightly under the chandelier light. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You can't open it." At the far end of the room, Madison Clark, William's fiancée, let out a soft laugh that carried just enough elegance to sound harmless, though her eyes flickered with something sharper. "That's adorable," she said, tilting her head slightly as if amused by a child's imagination. But Aaliyah didn't look at her, because her focus wasn't on people, it was on the box. Something about it felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain with words, only with instinct, like a silent alarm ringing somewhere deep in her chest. The room began to murmur again, uncertain whether to continue or wait, and William Harrington studied the child more carefully now, his expression shifting from polite patience to quiet curiosity. He had built companies, signed contracts worth millions, negotiated deals in rooms far colder than this one, yet something in Aaliyah's stillness made him hesitate. "Why?" he asked finally, setting his hand down beside the box instead of on it, his tone softer now, less dismissive than before. Aaliyah swallowed, her fingers curling tightly at her sides as she took a small step forward, close enough now that she could see the faint reflection of the chandelier bending across the glossy surface of the gift wrap. "Because I heard it," she said quietly, and the words landed heavier than anyone expected. Victoria frowned slightly. "Heard what, honey?" she asked, trying to maintain calm. Aaliyah hesitated for a moment, then reached into the small pocket of her dress and pulled out a cracked phone screen still faintly glowing. "I didn't mean to," she added quickly, as if afraid of being scolded, "but it played when I walked by the hallway earlier." William's gaze dropped to the device, his expression tightening just slightly as the surrounding noise of the ballroom seemed to fade into the background. Madison shifted her posture, her smile still in place but thinner now, like something carefully maintained rather than naturally held. Aaliyah pressed play. A faint audio crackled through the phone, barely audible at first, then clearer, voices discussing timing, mentioning the gift, and a phrase that made William's expression change almost imperceptibly. The room grew quieter without anyone realizing it, conversations fading one by one like lights dimming across a stage. William straightened slightly, his attention now fully locked on the box, then back to Aaliyah, who stood her ground despite the weight of every adult gaze in the room. "Where did you hear that?" he asked carefully, his voice no longer dismissive but measured, controlled, alert. Aaliyah pointed softly toward the hallway beyond the ballroom, where shadows stretched longer than they should have under the soft lighting. "Near the office door," she said. "They didn't see me." A long silence followed, the kind that doesn't feel. Empty, but full of unspoken possibilities. Madison stepped forward now, her tone smooth but sharper underneath. "William, this is ridiculous. It's just a gift for tonight's announcement," she said, gesturing lightly toward the box as if trying to reframe the moment, but Aaliyah's eyes never left it. Something about the way the ribbon sat slightly uneven, the way the edges reflected light differently than expected, made her stomach tighten. William exhaled slowly, looking down at the box again, then at the child who had interrupted everything without raising her voice beyond a whisper. "Aaliyah," he said carefully, as if testing the weight of her name in this moment. "What exactly do you think is inside?" She hesitated, then answered with a certainty that didn't match her age. "Something that shouldn't be opened here." The words lingered in the air, shifting everything in the room without anyone fully understanding why. And for the first time since the gala began, no one reached for the gift. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music that still quietly played somewhere in the distance of the ballroom, as if the entire celebration had been forced into a slower rhythm by a single child's warning. William Harrington kept his eyes on Aaliyah Johnson for a moment longer, studying her face with the kind of attention he usually reserved for negotiations and risks that carried consequences far beyond a single evening. Around them, guests began to shift uncomfortably, unsure whether to resume conversation or wait for permission from the man who had built the evening itself. Victoria Lane gently adjusted her posture, leaning slightly closer to William and lowering her voice. "Sir, it is probably just nerves. She is a child. These events can feel overwhelming," she said carefully, trying to restore order to the moment without creating embarrassment for anyone involved. Madison Clark stepped closer as well, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, her expression composed, but her tone carrying a controlled warmth that did not fully reach her eyes. "We should not let this become a distraction," she said, placing a light hand near William's arm though, not quite touching him. "Tonight is important for the announcement, and the partners are already watching." Aaliyah, however, had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been, her small hands clenched at her sides, her gaze still locked on the black-wrapped gift as if it were the only object in the room that mattered. William finally exhaled slowly and turned slightly toward Victoria. "Have security check the hallway," she mentioned, he said calmly, his voice controlled but no longer dismissive. Victoria hesitated for half a second, surprised by the instruction, then nodded and stepped away toward a discreet earpiece conversation. The shift was subtle but real, like the air pressure in the room had changed. Madison noticed it immediately. "William," she said softly, a gentle smile still in place, "you are not actually considering this, are you?" He did not answer right away. Instead, his attention drifted back to the gift box, the black wrapping reflecting the chandelier light in a way that now seemed less elegant and more deliberate. Aaliyah took a small step forward, then stopped, as if careful not to cross a boundary she still respected even while trying to protect him. "I am not trying to ruin anything," she said quietly, her voice steady but fragile in the way only truth spoken without preparation can be. "I just heard them say it should be opened in front of everyone." William's eyes narrowed slightly at that detail, not in anger but in calculation. "Who exactly said that?" he asked, his tone more precise now. Aaliyah hesitated again, then answered, "Two people near the side office. I did not see their faces clearly." Madison gave a small, almost sympathetic laugh, though it carried tension underneath. "This is exactly what I was referring to," she said, turning slightly toward the guests as if to include them in a shared understanding. "Children misinterpret things, especially in unfamiliar environments." But before the room could relax back into agreement, Victoria returned, her expression no longer casual. She leaned toward William and spoke quietly, just enough for him to hear. "Sir, there was movement near the west corridor earlier, but no one is currently there. However, one of the storage doors was found slightly open." That detail changed the temperature of William's expression. He did not react dramatically, but something in his focus sharpened, the way it did when numbers stopped being theoretical and became real. He looked again at Aaliyah, and this time there was less doubt in his eyes. "You did not touch the box," he said, more as a statement than a question. "No," she replied immediately, shaking her head. "I only saw it when they brought it in." A pause followed, during which the entire room seemed to collectively understand that the situation had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. William slowly took a step closer to the gift, not touching it yet, but lowering his hand near the edge as if assessing it from a distance. Madison's smile tightened slightly. "William, this is unnecessary. You are letting imagination override reason," she said carefully, her voice still calm but less certain than before. Aaliyah glanced up at him then, her voice dropping even softer. "If you open it and it is wrong, you will not be able to undo it, she said, not as a threat, but as a simple fact, the way a child might describe weather changing before a storm. That sentence lingered longer than anything else spoken that night. William looked at her for a long moment, then slowly withdrew his hand from the box. "Victoria," he said, without looking away from the gift, "bring the security footage from the hallway entrance 15 minutes before the gift arrived." Victoria nodded again, this time without hesitation, and stepped away quickly. A faint shift moved through the guests as they realized this was no longer an interruption, but an unfolding inquiry. Madison's gaze tightened for the first time, her composure still intact, but now visibly strained at the edges. Aaliyah remained still, though her shoulders lowered slightly, as if she sensed she had been heard but not yet believed. William finally turned his head slightly toward her. "If you are right," he said carefully, "this changes everything about tonight." Aaliyah did not smile or relax. She simply nodded once, because she understood that truth did not need celebration to exist, only recognition. And in that moment, with the gift still untouched under the golden lights, the room began to feel as though it was standing at the edge of something no one had fully seen yet, but everyone was about to understand. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted again as Victoria Lane returned with a slim tablet in her hands, her expression now far more serious than before. She approached William Harrington and lowered her voice just enough to avoid drawing attention from the guests, who were now pretending not to watch while doing exactly that. "Sir, I have the hallway footage," she said quietly, holding the device steady. William took it without a word, his eyes briefly flicking toward Aaliyah Johnson, who still stood in the same place near the gift table, her small frame tense but unwavering. The music in the background had been turned down slightly, almost unnoticed, as if even the sound system had adjusted itself to the growing tension. William tapped the screen once, and the footage began to play. At first it showed nothing unusual, just a quiet corridor near the west wing of the venue, dimly lit with soft golden lights and polished floors reflecting empty space. Then movement appeared. Two figures, partially obscured by the angle of the camera, stepped into frame carrying a medium-sized black-wrapped box. They moved quickly, not rushed in panic, but controlled, deliberate, as if following instructions they already understood. One of them glanced toward the camera briefly, then adjusted their posture and continued walking. Victoria leaned in slightly. "That matches the delivery time of the gift," she murmured. William did not respond immediately, his focus narrowing as the footage continued. The figures stopped briefly near a side table outside the main ballroom entrance. One of them appeared to adjust something on the box, a small motion too subtle to fully identify at first glance. Aaliyah took a half step forward without realizing it, her eyes fixed on the screen now. The footage cut to a second angle, this time showing the same corridor from a higher position. This angle revealed more detail, including a brief exchange between the two individuals and someone else just out of full view. The audio, faint but clear enough, began to filter through the tablet speakers. "It needs to be placed exactly where it will be opened in front of everyone," a voice said, calm and precise. Another voice responded, "He will open it himself. He always does when the spotlight is on him." William's expression changed slightly at that, not dramatically, but enough that Victoria noticed immediately. Madison Clark, standing just a few steps away, shifted her weight subtly and let out a small, controlled laugh. "This is absurd," she said gently, though her voice carried a trace of strain now. "You are listening to out-of-context security chatter. This could be about anything." William did not look at her. His attention remained locked on the screen as the footage continued. The figures in the hallway moved again, this time placing the box carefully onto a service cart before it was later brought into the ballroom earlier that evening. A timestamp appeared in the corner of the footage, confirming the sequence of events with precision. Aaliyah's voice broke the next silence, soft but steady. "That is the same box," she said simply, pointing without hesitation. William glanced at her again, then back at the screen. Victoria replayed the audio segment. The same voices returned, this time clearer as the recording isolated background noise. "Once it is opened during the announcement, everything will align," the voice said. "No one will question it if it happens in front of everyone." The words hung in the air like something heavier than sound. William slowly lowered the tablet slightly, his jaw tightening as he processed what he was hearing. Around them, the guests had begun to notice the shift. Conversations had stopped completely now, replaced by an uneasy stillness that spread from table to table. Madison stepped closer again, her tone sharpening slightly while still maintaining control. "William, you are making a very serious interpretation based on partial audio," she said, carefully choosing each word. "You know how easily context can be distorted in recordings like this." But William finally turned toward her, his expression no longer uncertain, but measured and focused. "Then explain why the delivery instructions specifically mention this event," he said calmly. Madison paused for half a second longer than comfortable before responding. "It is likely corporate coordination. You are launching a major announcement tonight. There are always logistical discussions happening behind the scenes." Aaliyah looked between them, her small hands still clenched, but her voice did not rise. "They said it should be opened in front of everyone," she repeated, as if reminding them of the original warning rather than adding to the argument. William exhaled slowly, then looked back at the box itself. For the first time, he did not see it as a ceremonial gift. He saw it as a variable in an equation that no longer balanced. Victoria leaned closer again, her voice lower now. "Sir, we can isolate the source of the audio further. We may also need to pause the unveiling until we confirm all parties involved." That statement alone caused a subtle ripple through the nearby guests, some of whom now looked at the gift as if it had changed shape without moving. William raised one hand slightly, signaling a pause in all action. "No one opens anything yet," he said firmly, his voice carrying enough authority that even the distant murmurs stopped. Madison's expression tightened for a fraction of a second, then returned to composed neutrality. Aaliyah finally relaxed her shoulders slightly, though her eyes remained locked on the box, as if waiting for it to confirm what she already knew. William studied her once more, this time with a different kind of attention, not curiosity or doubt, but recognition that something important had already happened before anyone else understood it. "You did not guess," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Aaliyah shook her head once. "I listened," she replied again, the same answer as before, simple and unwavering. And in that moment, as the tablet dimmed and the ballroom remained frozen in suspended uncertainty, the balance of power in the room had already begun to shift in a direction no one had fully accepted yet, but none of them could ignore anymore. The tension inside the Harrington gala had become something no longer contained by conversation or polite distance, but instead spread silently through every corner of the ballroom like an invisible weight pressing down on the guests. William Harrington stood near the central table, his attention divided between the black-wrapped gift and the tablet still in Victoria Lane's hands, while Aaliyah Johnson remained just a few feet away, steady but alert, as if she understood that the moment had not ended but only shifted into its next stage. Madison Clark stepped closer to William again, her movements controlled, her expression carefully maintained, though the subtle tightening around her eyes betrayed a growing discomfort beneath her composed exterior. "William," she said softly, ensuring her voice remained calm enough for others to hear without drawing suspicion. "You are allowing a child's interpretation of partial recordings to influence a very important evening. This is not how decisions like this should be made." William did not immediately respond, his gaze still fixed on the box as if it had stopped being an object and had become a question. Victoria glanced between them, clearly aware that the situation was no longer about simple verification, but about competing versions of reality forming in real time. Aaliyah spoke again, her voice quiet but firm, breaking through the layered tension. "I did not interpret it," she said. "I heard it exactly how it was." Madison turned her head slightly toward the girl, her smile still present but thinner now. "Sweetheart, adults are handling this," she replied gently, though the phrasing carried a subtle attempt to re-establish hierarchy rather than comfort. Aaliyah did not step back. Instead, she lifted her eyes toward William again, as if the only opinion that mattered now was his. William finally exhaled and gestured slightly for Victoria to continue the review. "Play it again," he said calmly. Victoria complied, rewinding the recording to the segment where the voices in the hallway had discussed the timing and placement of the box. As the audio played once more, clearer this time, the surrounding guests leaned in almost involuntarily, their curiosity overcoming their earlier attempts to appear indifferent. The words repeated through the small speaker, confirming the same message about timing, visibility, and the expectation that the gift would be opened publicly during the announcement. William's expression tightened slightly, not in anger but in concentration, as if assembling fragmented pieces into a structure that was beginning to make sense. Madison adjusted her stance subtly, her composure still intact, but her breathing now slightly more measured. William, you are building a conclusion from a recording that does not identify any clear intent, she said carefully, her tone still controlled but less fluid than before. We are dealing with assumptions, not verified facts. William finally turned toward her fully. His voice remained even, but there was a firmness beneath it that had not been there earlier. Then why does it specifically reference this event, this timing, and this location, he asked, if it is unrelated? The question hung in the air without urgency, but with precision. Madison paused for a fraction longer than before responding, her gaze briefly shifting toward the surrounding guests before returning to him. Because coordination happens behind every major announcement, she replied. It does not mean there is anything wrong. Aaliyah took a small step forward, as if unable to remain silent any longer. They said it should happen when everyone is watching, she repeated, her voice steady but unmistakably earnest. That is why I stopped you. A brief silence followed, during which William looked at her again, this time not as a child interrupting an event, but as a participant in something that had already begun before anyone realized it. Victoria lowered her voice slightly. Sir, we can isolate the audio source further and verify identities from additional cameras. If there is any coordinated activity, we will identify it within minutes. William nodded once, then raised his hand slightly again. Do it, he said. The instruction was simple, but it changed the atmosphere immediately. Victoria moved away quickly, communicating through her earpiece as she coordinated additional checks with the security team. The guests, sensing the shift, now fully abandoned casual conversation. Every glance was directed toward the center table where the black-wrapped gift remained untouched, its presence now carrying a weight it had not held earlier. Madison turned slightly toward William once more, her voice softer now, carefully measured. You are creating unnecessary disruption in front of your guests, she said, lowering her tone just enough to sound concerned rather than confrontational. William did not look away from the box. I am preventing uncertainty from becoming assumption, he replied. Aaliyah remained still, but her eyes softened slightly as if she understood that the moment of disbelief was beginning to crack open. Victoria returned within moments. Her expression changed. She leaned in quickly and spoke just loud enough for William to hear. Sir, additional camera angles confirm 2 individuals entering the service corridor with the package earlier. Their identities are not registered staff. That sentence altered everything in the room without a sound. William's attention sharpened immediately. Not registered, he repeated quietly. Victoria nodded. Security is attempting identification now. Madison's smile did not disappear, but it no longer held the same ease. A subtle stillness replaced it, like something carefully maintained under pressure. William slowly turned his head toward the gift again, then toward Aaliyah. You saw this before any of us did, he said. Aaliyah nodded once. I just did not know how to explain it better, she replied. William stood in silence for a moment longer, then spoke firmly without raising his voice. No one opens anything until security confirms every source of access to this room. The instructions settled over the ballroom like a final boundary being drawn. Even the guests who had been watching from a distance now fully understood that the evening had moved beyond ceremony. Madison stepped back slightly, her posture still composed, but her control of the situation visibly weakened. Aaliyah remained where she was, but her shoulders relaxed just enough to show she was no longer standing alone in disbelief. William looked at her one more time, his expression no longer uncertain. If you are right, he said quietly, then what happens next will matter far more than this evening ever was supposed to. And in that moment, with security reports still incoming and the gift still untouched under the golden light, the truth of the situation was no longer a question of opinion, but a process already unfolding beyond anyone's ability to stop it. The moment Victoria Lane confirmed that the individuals carrying the black wrapped package were not registered staff, the entire energy inside the Harrington gala shifted into a quiet state of controlled urgency. William Harrington did not react with panic, but with immediate structure, as if the situation had moved from speculation into a problem requiring containment and clarity. Security personnel began moving discreetly through the perimeter of the ballroom, communicating through subtle hand signals and earpieces, ensuring that guests remained unaware of the full scope of the unfolding verification process. Aaliyah Johnson remained near the central table, her eyes still fixed on the gift, though her posture had softened slightly now that her warning was being taken seriously rather than dismissed. Madison Clark, however, stood slightly apart from William, her expression carefully composed but her silence now carrying more weight than her earlier explanations. William turned slightly toward Victoria. "Where are those individuals now?" he asked calmly. Victoria checked her device quickly. Last confirmed location was the service corridor near the west exit. "They have not been seen entering or exiting since the package was delivered to the ballroom," she replied. William nodded once, then gestured for continued surveillance without escalating public disruption. The guests, unaware of the full details, had begun to sense the change in tone. Conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by the kind of quiet that forms when people realize something important is happening just beyond their understanding. Aaliyah finally spoke again, her voice small but steady. "They were nervous when they passed me," she said, as if recalling a detail she had not fully processed earlier. They kept looking back. William glanced at her, then at Victoria. "Did the cameras capture their faces clearly?" he asked. Victoria hesitated for a moment, scrolling through additional frames. "Partially. One individual was wearing a service jacket not issued by this venue. The other avoided all direct angles." Madison stepped forward slightly, her tone carefully neutral but now more deliberate. "William, even if there are unauthorized individuals in the building, that does not automatically connect them to the gift itself," she said. "We are still assuming intent without verified linkage." William did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the black wrapped box again, now sitting under the chandelier light like an unresolved equation. Aaliyah took a small breath before speaking again. "They said it had to be opened in front of everyone," she repeated softly. "Not somewhere private." That detail seemed to settle differently in William's mind this time. He turned slightly toward Victoria. "Increase internal sweep of all service access points," he said. "I want confirmation of every hand that has come within 2 meters of that package since it arrived." Victoria nodded and moved quickly to relay the instructions. The atmosphere tightened further as security protocols quietly expanded throughout the venue. Guests were now visibly aware that something had changed, even if they did not yet know what it was. Madison's expression shifted subtly as she observed the growing coordination around her. "This is becoming disproportionate," she said carefully, maintaining her calm tone. "You are escalating internal procedures based on incomplete information from a child and partial surveillance clips." William finally turned to face her directly. His voice remained controlled, but there was no longer hesitation in it. "It is not incomplete if multiple independent sources align," he said. Aaliyah looked up at him briefly, then back at the box, as if reassured by the fact that she was no longer standing alone in her concern. Victoria returned once more, this time with a different urgency in her steps. She leaned closer to William and spoke quietly. "Sir, we have identified a breach in the service entry log. A temporary override was used to allow non-credentialed access during delivery window. It was authorized under a secondary approval channel." William's eyes narrowed slightly. "Secondary approval channel," he repeated. Victoria nodded. "It is registered under internal executive permissions." A brief silence followed. Madison did not move, but something in her posture became more rigid, as if she understood the direction of the conversation before it fully reached its conclusion. William slowly looked toward her. "You authorized access to the service corridor," he said calmly, not as a question, but as confirmation seeking denial. Madison met his gaze evenly. "I approved logistical access for the event coordination team," she replied. Nothing more. Aaliyah's eyes shifted between them, sensing the change in tone, even if she did not fully understand its implications. William turned back toward Victoria. "Verify the authorization chain immediately," he said. Victoria nodded again, and stepped away. The room now felt suspended between revelation and confirmation, as if every action was waiting for one final piece to lock into place. Madison exhaled slowly, maintaining her composure. "William, you are allowing a child's observation to influence how you interpret administrative procedure," she said gently. "That is not a secure way to evaluate operational integrity." William did not respond at first. Instead, he took a slow step toward the central table, stopping just short of the black-wrapped gift. The chandelier light reflected faintly off the edges of the packaging, revealing subtle imperfections that now seemed more noticeable than before. Aaliyah stood still, watching him carefully. "I only wanted to stop something before it could not be stopped," she said quietly. William looked down at her for a long moment. "You already did," he replied. At that moment, Victoria returned. Her expression changed again, this time with certainty. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice, "the secondary authorization was issued from a device registered under Madison Clark's executive clearance profile." The words did not echo, but they landed with undeniable clarity. William did not immediately react outwardly. Instead, his gaze slowly shifted from Victoria to Madison. The room, still unaware of every detail, felt the shift in authority even without understanding its cause. Aaliyah remained silent, but her expression softened slightly, as if the invisible tension she had been carrying was finally being acknowledged by the world around her. And in that quiet, with security protocols tightening and truth beginning to surface through verified channels, the evening had reached a point where nothing could remain exactly as it had been before. The moment Victoria Lane confirmed that the secondary authorization used to access the service corridor had been issued through a device registered under Madison Clark's executive clearance profile, the entire atmosphere inside the Harrington Gala changed in a way that was no longer subtle or reversible. William Harrington did not react immediately with words. Instead, he stood still for a brief moment, as if allowing the information to settle into a complete picture rather than a fragment of suspicion. Around him, security personnel tightened their internal coordination, no longer focused solely on the gift itself, but now extending verification across access logs, staff movements, and authorization records tied to the evening's preparation. Aaliyah Johnson remained near the central table, her small hands now relaxed at her sides, though her eyes stayed fixed on William, as if watching for confirmation that what she had felt earlier was finally being understood. Madison Clark, on the other hand, maintained her posture, but the slight shift in her breathing and the controlled stillness of her expression suggested that the situation had moved beyond her original control. William slowly turned toward Madison. His voice remained even, but it carried a weight that now came from verified information rather than interpretation. "Explain the secondary authorization under your clearance profile," he said calmly. Madison responded without hesitation, though her tone had lost some of its earlier fluid confidence. "My credentials are used for coordinating executive-level logistics," she said. "It is not unusual for temporary access permissions to be issued during high-profile events." Victoria stepped slightly forward, holding her tablet at an angle so only William could see the updated logs. "Sir, the authorization was not routed through standard event coordination protocols," she clarified. "It bypassed 2 verification checkpoints." A quiet tension spread through the room as guests began to sense that the conversation had moved into territory far more serious than an interrupted ceremony. William did not raise his voice. Instead, he took a slow step away from the gift table, placing himself between Aaliyah and the center of the investigation, as if ensuring that the child remained outside of any shifting emotional pressure. "Was this access used for any other object besides the gift?" he asked. Victoria checked quickly. "There are no additional logged modifications to other event materials," she replied. Aaliyah finally spoke again, her voice small but steady. "That is the only thing they were carrying," she said, glancing briefly at the black-wrapped box. William looked at her, then back at the evidence being presented. Madison exhaled softly, maintaining her composure, though her gaze now avoided direct alignment with William's for longer than before. "William, you are drawing a direct conclusion from procedural anomalies," she said carefully. "Even if there was an authorization irregularity, that does not establish intent or connection to wrongdoing." William nodded slightly, acknowledging the distinction, but not accepting it as final. Intent is not the first requirement for concern, he replied. Access without proper verification is sufficient to pause action. Victoria leaned in again, her tone lower now. Sir, we have completed cross-verification with external entry logs. The individuals who delivered the package did not originate from any approved vendor list. Their entry was facilitated through the same secondary clearance. A silent pause followed. This time, even the guests closest to the stage had stopped pretending not to listen. The room had become fully aware that something beneath the surface of the evening had been exposed layer by layer. Madison's expression tightened slightly, but she remained composed. William, I approved expedited access because of scheduling constraints communicated by your own planning department, she said. There was no indication of risk. William studied her for a long moment, then turned slightly toward Victoria. Confirm whether those scheduling constraints exist in writing, he said. Victoria nodded and began checking immediately. Aaliyah shifted her weight slightly, looking between the adults as if trying to understand every layer of the unfolding conversation, though her earlier certainty had not changed. They said it had to be opened where everyone could see it. She repeated softly, almost to herself, as if the original warning still anchored everything she knew about the situation. William looked down at her again. You did not hear that by accident, he said quietly. Aaliyah shook her head once. I heard it because I was close enough when they thought no one was listening. Victoria's device chimed softly. She checked it immediately, her expression changing as she read the updated confirmation. Sir, she said, there is no written record of the scheduling directive referenced by Madison Clark. A stillness followed that was deeper than anything before it. Madison finally turned her head fully toward Victoria, her composure still intact, but her voice now more precise. Then someone within operations failed to log the directive properly, she said. William raised a hand slightly, not interrupting, but signaling control over the flow of discussion. Or, he said calmly, the directive did not originate from operations at all. No one responded immediately. The implication filled the space between them without needing further explanation. Aaliyah looked up at William again, her expression unchanged but more certain now that her warning had moved from intuition into verification. Victoria stepped back slightly, allowing the information to settle. Sir, if the authorization and delivery chain are both compromised, we recommend securing all remaining unscreened assets within the ballroom until full verification is complete, she said. William nodded once. Do it, he replied. Security teams began moving more visibly now, not aggressively, but with coordinated precision as they extended controlled procedures across the room. Guests remained in place, observing rather than reacting, as the structure of the evening shifted around them. Madison stood still for a moment longer, then slowly exhaled. William, I have supported every phase of this event, she said quietly. If there is a misunderstanding, I would prefer it be resolved through full review rather than assumption. William looked at her directly. His voice remained calm, but firm. That is exactly what is happening, he said. Aaliyah remained near the table, but now she was no longer isolated in her concern. The presence of verified data, structured review, and active security confirmation had transformed her warning from something fragile into something supported by evidence. And as the ballroom remained suspended in controlled silence, the truth was no longer something being guessed at, but something that was actively being assembled piece by piece in real time. The ballroom had become a controlled space of silent motion, where security personnel moved with quiet precision while guests remained seated under the illusion that nothing had yet fully broken, even though everyone could feel that the structure of the evening had already changed beyond repair. William Harrington stood near the center table, no longer treating the black-wrapped gift as a ceremonial object, but as a secured item under active review, while Victoria Lane continued coordinating updates through her earpiece, her focus divided between internal logs and incoming confirmations. Aaliyah Johnson remained slightly behind William's right side, her presence small in scale but no longer dismissed by anyone in the room, because every new layer of verification had aligned with what she had originally warned. Madison Clark stood a few steps away, still composed, still elegant in posture, but now surrounded by a kind of attention that was no longer social, but investigative. William finally broke the silence. Security reports confirm no external vendor authorization and no valid scheduling directive, he said evenly, his eyes fixed not on the room but on Madison herself. Everything points back to internal clearance misuse. Madison met his gaze without immediate reaction, as if weighing each word before responding. Internal systems are complex, she said calmly. A mismatch in logging does not automatically indicate intent or personal involvement. Victoria stepped forward again, holding her tablet at a slight angle. Sir, the secondary clearance used to approve access originated from a device that was active within the executive suite 30 minutes before the package entered the venue, she said. William's expression did not change dramatically, but the stillness in his posture sharpened. Aaliyah looked up at him briefly, then back toward Madison, as if connecting pieces she could not fully articulate, but clearly understood on instinct. William took a slow step forward, closing the distance between himself and Madison. Was your device used to authorize corridor access for this package? He asked, his voice steady but direct. A pause followed, longer than any previous silence in the conversation. Madison's expression remained controlled, but for the first time, the elegance in her composure showed a trace of strain. I manage multiple approvals throughout event preparation, she replied carefully. I cannot speak to every automated delegation that may have occurred through shared credentials. Victoria immediately responded, checking her device again. Sir, there are no records of automated delegation for that specific clearance window, she said. The absence of ambiguity in that statement shifted the atmosphere again, making it noticeably heavier. William did not look away from Madison. Then it was not automated, he said quietly. Aaliyah stepped forward slightly without realizing it, her voice soft but steady. They were talking about opening it when everyone was watching, she said again, reinforcing what she had heard from the beginning, not as accusation, but as memory she could not ignore. Madison turned her head slightly toward the child, her expression still composed, but now carrying a subtle edge of urgency beneath it. Children often interpret fragments of adult conversation without context, she said. William raised one hand gently, signaling that the discussion was no longer about interpretation. Context is exactly what we now have, he replied. Victoria received another update and immediately stepped closer. Sir, cross-verification from internal communication logs shows a brief, encrypted message sent from the same clearance device during the delivery window, she said. It referenced timing alignment with the announcement segment of tonight's event. That confirmation settled the final uncertainty that had remained in the room. Guests no longer shifted or whispered. They simply watched, fully aware that the situation had moved from suspicion into structured verification. Madison's breathing remained controlled, but her silence now lasted longer than before. William spoke again, his tone unchanged but final in its direction. Madison, explain why your clearance was used to coordinate timing alignment for an unregistered delivery without vendor traceability. Madison finally exhaled slowly. William, she said, maintaining eye contact, you are interpreting procedural overlap as personal action. That is not accurate to how executive coordination functions. William nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement but not accepting it. Then you will not object to full audit of your clearance activity for the last 48 hours, he said. A brief pause followed. Madison did not respond immediately. Aaliyah remained still, watching carefully, her expression calm but attentive, as if she understood that the truth was no longer hidden, but simply waiting for confirmation through process rather than emotion. Victoria spoke softly. Sir, security audit has already isolated all interactions tied to that clearance. The remaining verification step is direct device confirmation. William turned slightly toward her. Proceed, he said. Madison's gaze shifted briefly toward the surrounding security personnel, then back to William. This is unnecessary escalation, she said quietly. You are allowing incomplete interpretation of system logs to override professional trust. William responded without raising his voice. Trust is not removed, he said. It is revalidated through verification. A moment of stillness followed, during which Victoria completed a final check and received a confirmation on her device. She looked up. Sir, she said, device confirmation matches clearance activity for service corridor access and delivery authorization during the event window. That sentence removed the last layer of ambiguity from the situation. Madison stood still, her expression now fully controlled but no longer flexible, as if she had reached the boundary of explanation. William did not react immediately outwardly, but his attention shifted briefly toward Aaliyah, then back to Madison. "Then the chain of authorization is confirmed," he said calmly. Aaliyah exhaled slightly, not in relief, but in recognition that what she had sensed had now been fully validated through formal channels. Victoria stepped back, allowing security to adjust internal protocols accordingly. The ballroom remained silent, but no longer uncertain. Everything now moved within a framework of verified information, structured review, and irreversible clarity. And as William Harrington stood at the center of it all, the presence of the unopened gift no longer represented mystery alone, but the final remaining point in a situation that had already revealed more truth than anyone in the room had expected to face when the evening began. The confirmation that Madison Clark's clearance activity had been fully verified through device-level authentication brought a final and irreversible clarity to the Harrington Gala, transforming what had begun as a ceremonial evening into a controlled investigative environment under William Harrington's direct authority. Security teams maintained discreet positions around the perimeter of the ballroom, ensuring guests remained calm, while internal protocols finalized their assessment of all actions tied to the service corridor, delivery chain, and the black-wrapped gift that still remained untouched at the center table. Aaliyah Johnson stood quietly near. William sighed, her presence now no longer questioned by anyone in the room, as every stage of verification had aligned with the warnings she had given from the very beginning. Madison Clark remained still a few steps away, her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral, but the absence of verbal defense in the last moments revealed a shift from explanation to acceptance of confirmed data. William Harrington finally spoke, his voice calm but definitive. "All authorization pathways, communication logs, and delivery records have now been fully verified," he said. "There are no remaining ambiguities in the access chain." The room did not react outwardly, but the silence deepened as guests understood that this statement represented closure on the procedural side of the situation. Victoria Lane lowered her tablet slightly, confirming the final system update. "All internal reviews are complete, sir," she said. William nodded once, then turned his attention fully toward Madison. "Your clearance was used to authorize access that bypassed standard vendor validation and security confirmation," he said evenly. "That action is now fully documented." Madison inhaled slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I have already stated that my involvement was within the scope of event coordination," she replied. "There was no intention to bypass security integrity." Aaliyah looked up briefly at William, then back at the gift, as if sensing that the procedural investigation had reached its conclusion, leaving only the physical object at the center of attention unresolved. William stepped closer to the table, now fully focused on the black-wrapped package that had remained untouched since the beginning of the evening. "The authorization chain is verified," he said quietly. "The delivery chain is verified. The timing alignment is verified." He paused for a moment before continuing. "The only remaining variable is the object itself." Victoria immediately responded. "Sir, security recommends controlled opening procedure with containment support on standby until full identification is confirmed," she said. William nodded. "Proceed under controlled conditions," he replied. The guests shifted slightly as security personnel moved closer to the central table, forming a discreet perimeter around the gift. The atmosphere remained silent, but the anticipation had changed in nature. It was no longer uncertainty about what had happened, but expectation of what would be revealed. Aaliyah took a small step back, standing slightly behind William now, her eyes still fixed on the box, but her posture calmer than before, as if she understood that her role in warning had already been fulfilled. Madison did not move, but her gaze followed the activity at the table with measured attention. William signaled for the final step. A security officer approached carefully, placing protective measures around the immediate area before confirming readiness. Victoria observed the final system checks. "No external interference detected at this stage," she confirmed. William exhaled slowly, then reached forward with controlled precision. The room held its collective breath as his hand made contact with the black wrapping. The motion was deliberate, slow, and contained, reflecting not hesitation but procedural care. The wrapping was lifted carefully, revealing a sealed container beneath, designed not for presentation but for concealment. A subtle shift moved through the security team as they observed the structure of the packaging itself, noting its lack of standard ceremonial design. William did not open it further yet. Instead, he paused and looked at Victoria. "Confirm final containment readiness," he said. Victoria nodded immediately. "Ready," she replied. Aaliyah watched silently, her earlier tension replaced by quiet focus, as if she was no longer predicting outcomes but observing confirmation of what she had already understood. Madison remained still, her expression unchanged but no longer projecting control over the situation. William turned his attention back to the container and slowly completed the opening sequence under controlled protocol. The inner layer revealed structured components secured in a way that clearly indicated intentional design rather than decorative purpose. There was no immediate reaction of alarm or disruption, only a collective recognition that the object had been constructed with precision for a specific function within the event environment. Victoria leaned slightly forward, analyzing the internal structure. "This is not a ceremonial gift package," she said quietly. "This is a secured technical assembly unit." William studied it in silence for a moment longer before responding. "Which confirms that its placement here was not incidental," he said calmly. Aaliyah spoke softly from behind him. "That is why it could not be opened without everyone seeing it," she said. William glanced back at her briefly, acknowledging the consistency of her earlier warning. The room remained completely still as the implications settled across every guest. Security maintained their positions, ensuring stability while awaiting further instruction. Madison stood in silence, her earlier confidence now fully replaced by controlled stillness, as the situation no longer required interpretation but only acknowledgement of what had been revealed through structured verification. And in that moment, with the object fully exposed under the chandelier light and every procedural layer confirmed, the evening reached a state of complete clarity where nothing remained hidden, only understood. The moment the internal assembly inside the black container was fully exposed under controlled security protocol, the atmosphere inside the Harrington Gala reached a level of absolute stillness that felt heavier than any sound that had filled the room earlier that evening. William Harrington stood directly in front of the table, his gaze fixed on the structure that had been revealed, while Victoria Lane maintained her position slightly behind him, monitoring final system readouts and confirming that no external interference signals were active. Aaliyah Johnson remained quietly at a safe distance behind William, her small frame no longer tense, but calm in a way that suggested her concern had already transformed into confirmation. Madison Clark stood several steps away, her posture still composed, but the absence of any further verbal defense indicated that the situation had moved entirely beyond interpretation and into irreversible clarity. William finally spoke, his voice steady and precise. "This device is not decorative and it is not ceremonial," he said. "It is a structured monitoring unit designed to activate under public environmental conditions." A subtle reaction moved through the security team as they processed the classification. Victoria stepped closer and confirmed the analysis. "Internal architecture confirms signal capture and transmission capability," she said. "It is configured to activate in open visibility environments with maximum audience density." A quiet wave of understanding passed through the guests, not through explanation, but through realization of intent now supported by structural evidence. William did not look away from the device as he continued. "Which means its placement here was designed for one purpose," he said. "To activate during the announcement phase of this event." Aaliyah looked up slightly, her voice soft but certain. "That is what I heard them say," she repeated. Madison exhaled slowly, her expression still controlled but now fully exposed to the weight of confirmed findings. "William," she said carefully, "you are interpreting technical configuration as intent without context of deployment authorization." William turned toward her, his expression calm but final. "Context has already been established through verified access logs, communication records, and unauthorized clearance usage," he replied. Victoria reviewed the final incoming confirmation on her device. "Sir," Signal pathways within the unit are currently inactive due to containment protocol, but activation sequence logs indicate pre-programmed synchronization with event timing systems. A pause followed, deeper than before, as every guest in the room absorbed the full implication of what had been revealed. The gift was not symbolic. It was functional, and its placement had been coordinated with precision. Aaliyah remained still, watching William rather than the device now, as if waiting not for discovery, but for resolution. William slowly stepped back from the table, then turned slightly toward security. "Maintain containment," he said. "No further activation under any circumstance until full forensic analysis is complete." Security personnel confirmed immediately, reinforcing controlled perimeter protocols around the device. Madison finally spoke again, her tone softer but still measured. "William, I have served this organization through every stage of its growth and operational expansion," she said. "I would not knowingly participate in any action that compromises its integrity." William met her gaze directly. "Intent is no longer the subject of review," he replied. "Execution pathways and authorization misuse are what determine accountability." The room remained silent, not from tension alone, but from the finality of procedural clarity now replacing speculation. Victoria stepped slightly forward again. "Sir, external compliance teams have been notified and are en route for independent verification," she said. William nodded once. "Good," he replied. Aaliyah took a small step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only wanted to stop it before everyone saw it happen without knowing," she said. William looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You did," he replied. For the first time since the beginning of the evening, the outcome no longer felt uncertain. The structure of the situation had been fully exposed, verified, and contained under formal procedure. Madison stood quietly now, no longer speaking, as the remaining authority in the room shifted entirely to documented systems and independent oversight. William turned slightly toward the guests, his voice calm but authoritative. "This event will proceed no further in its original format," he said. "All proceedings are suspended pending full investigation." There was no resistance, only acceptance, as the announcement reflected what everyone already understood. Security began guiding guests with controlled movement toward designated exits, maintaining order without urgency. Victoria continued monitoring the device as containment remained stable. Aaliyah stayed close to William's side, no longer as an unnoticed child, but as the first verified source of warning that had redirected the entire evening before irreversible activation occurred. And as the ballroom slowly transitioned from suspended tension into structured resolution, the final truth was no longer hidden inside the device itself, but fully revealed in the sequence of actions that had brought it to light, ensuring that what had been intended to unfold under silence would never reach its intended moment of activation.